Democrats already lining up against President Trump's tax cut plan, but they might want to take some advice from an icon of the left who argued it's never about red or blue, but all about your green. Hi, everybody. I'm Dagen McDowell in for Neil Cavuto. This is a special edition of Your World. And we're not only celebrating Memorial Day today. Today marks the 100th anniversary of JFK's birth. And nearly 54 years ago, President Kennedy was pushing across-the-board tax cuts to boost the economy, making the case in an interview with NBC. Take a listen.
I'm in favor of a tax cut because I'm concerned that if we don't get the tax cut, that we're going to have an increase in unemployment and that we may move into a period of economic downturn. We had a recession in '58, recession in 1960. We've done pretty well since then, but we still have over 4 million unemployed. And I think this tax cut can give the stimulus to our economy over the next 2 or 3 years. I think it will provide for greater national wealth. I think it will reduce unemployment. I think it will strengthen our gold position. So I think that the proposal we've made is responsible and in the best interest of the country.
Just over 2 months later, JFK was gone. But his tax cuts passed through Congress in 1964, sparking a boom. A lesson for the left and right now. To Larry Sabato, author of The Kennedy Half Century and director of the University of Virginia's Center for Politics. Larry, it's always terrific to see you. Is it possible that politicians and lawmakers today can learn a lesson from JFK then?
Absolutely they can. That was a bold proposal for its time, and it had lots of opposition in both parties. They were more concerned about the size of the deficit, and they believed that a tax cut would generate a high inflation. Well, it didn't happen. That was a golden moment for the American economy, and America was in a very special, very dominant position in the world. But it's important to look at these proposals in the context of their times and to look at their specifics. And JFK did that, and I've got to note something that's really important. He started in 1962 pushing this proposal, pushing it. Right before he was killed in Dallas, he got the House of Representatives to approve it. It was on the Senate schedule. Of course, it was up to Lyndon Johnson to do it. And what's amusing is Lyndon Johnson pushed it first. It got passed in February 1964 because Johnson also believed Kennedy was right, and he wanted to give enough time for the maximum economic effect to take hold, boosting his election prospects. That's exactly what happened.
Well, Larry, what can our lawmakers today learn from back then? Clearly, one thing is JFK was terrific at messaging and communicating, not just to his base, but to the American people.
Yes, and one thing I noticed, and I've been over all his public statements and particularly his comments on TV and during his press conferences, he kept the message simple. He knew the facts, he knew the details, he would occasionally throw in a number, but he didn't drown in numbers, which sometimes congressmen and even presidents do when they're presenting tax proposals of one sort or another. You have to remember the audience. They can only follow so much at once, and they're not familiar, most of them, with the details of the tax code.
Back then, though, the tax code was even more so than now with our more than 70,000 pages. In terms of the tax rates, people were crying out for tax relief. The top rate, although very few people paid it, if any, was above 90% back then. That's a very different situation than it is today.
Yes, the rates are lower, but they were high back then, even on those making very little. People with an income of $4,000 a year were still paying 20% in federal taxes. Think about that. And of course, we know $4,000 is worth a lot more today, but still, that was a pretty high tax rate. I don't think it's the rate so much as it is the encouragement of a president and a Congress to those running the economy and those benefiting from the economy, top and bottom, to think about how they could use the money to benefit not just themselves, but the country as a whole. This should be, this new tax cut, whatever its form, it should be primarily for the middle class. JFK's was. It was for the middle class, and it was the middle class engine that got America revved up in the 60s, and until Lyndon Johnson ruined it with guns and butter during the Vietnam era, it really was a golden economy.
Larry, it's great to see you. Thank you so much. Have a great Memorial Day.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful Memorial Day.
Larry Sabato from the University of Virginia. So with Washington all jacked up for a summer brawl over tax cuts, is the lesson from JFK much like the lesson from Ronald Reagan? If you give the people more of their own money, the economy will grow more. Let's ask Gianno Caldwell and Danielle McLaughlin. Gianno, what do you say?
I say yes. I think that it's too bad that Democrats have rejected the knowledge of JFK at this particular time. But I think, like Forbes said, that trends are showing that this is going to be a growth year, 2017, considering the fact that we will get tax reform done within the first 2 years of the Trump administration. And businesses, for the first time in 8 years, have certainty of what's going to happen in the business climate. I think that people are more comfortable in spending their dollars under a Trump administration.
Well, Danielle, I know one thing, that higher taxes during the last 8 years of President Obama, more spending, a doubling of the government, our national debt, it didn't even get us growth of 3% in any year. I know that.
No, you're absolutely right, Dagan. We are been middling at about 1.5% to 2% to 2.5% over the last 8 years. We haven't seen 3% in more than a decade. And of course, Trump's budget depends on the notion that we will get 3% growth. I agree with Gianno that tax cuts are important and that consumer confidence and business confidence is very, very important also. The question is, who gets those tax cuts? Middle class, clearly important. Small businesses, clearly important. Big corporations in this country, you know, they pay about 15% once all the deductions are taken care of, but it's the small businesses who are getting crushed by taxes.
So, Danielle, it seems like Gianno is agreeing with the Trump idea that you give small businesses that are pay their taxes based on their own individual returns, you let them pay the same rate that the big guys pay, which is exactly what the Trump administration wants to do. That we're talking about 26 million small businesses in this country that create 2/3 of the new jobs. You level the playing field. How is that? How do Democrats fight against that?
Well, I mean, I can speak to that a little bit. I think that Democrats have concerns about the highest tax rates coming down and increased inequality. I'm not sure that these tax cuts address the middle class appropriately, because the engine of this country is the middle class, of course.
But, Gianno, talk about the leveling the playing field and bringing down those corporate rates to make all of our businesses, big and small, more competitive.
Well, when we talk about lowering it, that no matter if you're a freelancer, if you're a Fortune 500 company, if you're a mom and pop, you're paying the same tax rate. I think that is an excellent idea, and what we should do, especially considering the fact that the president's budget is usually more of a framework for Congress to push out. I think this is what we need to be doing, and this is the business of what we should be doing. And now that we finally have a united party in the House, the White House, Congress, all over, we can finally do something about it. And to speak to some of the Democratic hysteria over the tax plan, where we saw some issues where, well, not even issues, what people are saying, Democrats in the media are saying is issues, the $72 billion cut to Social Security, when in fact me as a person who worked for the Social Security Administration for over a decade in the SSI program, I can tell you there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse, and even the Inspector General had said this year that it was $1 billion sent to folks who shouldn't have received it, in terms of they didn't have SSN numbers, they have Social Security numbers. So there's a number of different things I think that this budget does very, very well, and it's going to cut, obviously, taxes for the middle class. I think that's very important here.
Danielle, I'm going to give you the final word, but what has always concerned me about the tax code is that the people who get the short end of the stick are lower income Americans or middle income to income households, because of the how complicated it is. And if you're trying to reform taxes and just double the standard deduction, which would make it easier to prepare your taxes, I don't understand how everybody in politics can't get on board with at least some elements of that.
I think simplification is important. As you say, the tax code is 70,000 pages long. But I think we have to think about tax as well as a tool of sort of social construct. product. We have the mortgage interest deduction because we want people to buy houses. So there are reasons for complexity within that tax code itself.
Well, you know what? There are no golden geese, I hope, in terms of tax reform, because you used to be able to deduct the interest on your credit card debt. You know who got rid of that? Ronald Reagan.
The good old days.
Yeah. How crazy is that, right? It was great to see you both, Danielle and Gianno. Thank you so much for being here. The TSA testing new security measures this holiday weekend at nearly a dozen U.S. airports. To Fox Business Network's Jeff Flock at Chicago's O'Hare International on what you can expect. Hey, Jeff.
Dagan, happy Memorial Day to you. I'll tell you, it may be a happy Memorial Day, but at certain airports around the country, maybe not so much so, because the TSA is trotting out and testing new security procedures. It's going to make it a little more difficult to get through the lines. Take a look at the airports where you made the Memorial Day holiday and into the summer. Some big airports, some medium-sized airports, Detroit, Boston, LAX, even small ones like Boise and Fort Lauderdale. New procedures that will require you to take a whole lot of things out of your carry-on bags that you didn't have to before. You're used to taking your laptop out. Well, get ready to take a lot more out. Like, look at this. Chocolate will have to now become something that you take out of your bag. That's because they found that chocolate looks an awful lot like plastic explosive when it goes through the security machine. Books also will have to come out because they're thick, and when someone has a book in there, they can't see what's under it. So then they have to go and, open the bag and all that sort of thing. So they want to put your book in a bin. iPads and tablets, anything essentially larger that's electronic, that's larger than a cell phone, will have to come out. As well as all food, any kind of food whatsoever, gives the screeners a problem, and so that will have to go